Hey everyone, it's Mystery Girl and I'm Missy. We're going to talk about the Amityville Horror House tonight. We're going to find out through Ronald DeFeo Jr. and his ex-wife, Geraldine, if the story behind the Amityville Horror is true. I want to know down below in the comments, have you heard of the Amityville Horror House? Do you believe it's true? Have you been there? Drop a comment below, and while you're dropping the comment, don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you're ready for this one because you're not going to want to miss a part of it. So make sure you got your cold beer, maybe a glass of wine, some soda, and for my coffee drinkers, go and get your coffee right now. I want everybody ready for this one. We're going back to the 1970s. The Amityville murder remains the most infamous murder on Long Island. On November 13, 1974, I was a baby being held and loved by my family. While approximately 45 minutes away in Amityville, Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed 6 of his family members at 112 Ocean Avenue in New York, which is on the south shore of Long Island. Since then, the house number has changed to 108. The population of Amityville in 1974 was 4,600 per square mile, which wasn't much different than the whole area of Miami, which was 4,800 per square mile. 4 different families have lived in the house since the murders, one who requested that the address be changed. This is why the house number changed from 112 to 108. In 1996, I went out to dinner with my now husband, his family, and some friends to celebrate his birthday at Katie Daly's Irish Restaurant on Merrick Road in Massapequa, New York, which was only 13 minutes away from the Amityville house. After dinner, he asked me if I wanted to go see the Amityville Horror House, telling me the whole story, the book, the movie were total BS. That the house wasn't haunted at all. Myself, never having gone there, said, yes, let's go. On the ride there, he tells me he has been to Henry's bar, the bar that Butch went to right after the murders happened, that him and a few co-workers had gone there on payday a couple of times. The company he worked for was based out of Lindenhurst. It was 7 minutes away, and my husband used to pick up and drop off a co-worker who lived across the street from the Amityville Horror House, just on the other side of the canal, so Henry's bar was right down the block and convenient. Henry's bar was a known dive. It was a known Coke bar. My husband said the bar sold more Coke than beer. My husband and his co-workers would go for a few beers after work. He said it was a dive, but convenient. The first time they went there, they sat at the bar. The bartender said, "You know that's the stool Butch DeFeo sat on. He sat on that stool all the time." Then continued to tell them all how Butch ran into the bar that night, yelling he killed his family. No one believed him. They thought he was stoned. After he said it a few times, someone finally called the cops. When we got to the house, honestly, the top windows were changed, which, if you ask me, those windows were the one creepy thing about the house. Without the windows, it was just another house. The other difference was the house was all white now. It was no longer white and black. Through the years, there have been movies, stories, and many related deals. So, tell me, what do you think about the Amityville house? Do you think it's haunted? Are you ready to meet the DeFeo family? In 1965, the DeFeo family moved into 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. When they moved in, neighbors thought that the DeFeos were a nice, normal family. It wasn't long before they found out that they were maniacs, according to Geraldine. They started having loud, vulgar arguments in the house and sometimes outside in the front or backyard and in the driveway as well. Neighbors would come out to see what was going on. The neighbors did not like Big Ronnie. They said he would go out and cry in front of the statue of St. Joseph after he did something wrong. And as time went on, they realized just how dysfunctional the DeFeo family was. Ronald DeFeo Sr., also known as Big Ronnie, was born on November 16, 1930, and died November 13, 1974, at the age of 43. He's buried at the St. Charles Cemetery in Farmingdale, New York. Had 5 children with Louise Briganti DeFeo, 3 sons and 2 daughters. His parents were Rocco and Antoinette DeFeo. His occupation was a service manager for Briganti Buick. He was given the position by his father-in-law, Michael Briganti. In 1951, he married Louise Briganti after a brief courtship against the Briganti's wishes. They moved to an apartment in Brooklyn on Foster Avenue in New York. He was called Big Ronnie for 2 reasons. 1, his size, and 2nd, because him and his son had the same name. The relationship between Big Ronnie and Louise did not sit well with Louise's Italian father, Michael, and her mother, Angela. Amends was made after Butch was born later that year in 1951. Big Ronnie went to work for his father-in-law, Michael Briganti, at the Buick dealership. He was made the service manager, and his father-in-law gave him a nice salary to make sure his family that was growing had plenty. Back in the 1950s, he was being paid approximately $400 a week. This was for keeping 2 sets of financial books as well, one that was accurate and one that was not. Trigger warning, this part includes discussion of DV. Trouble was starting in the DeFeo apartment, including DV. An example witnessed by Louise's brother, Michael Jr., who stated, when Butch was only 2 years old, Big Ronnie was annoyed by the baby's crying. He picked his son up, punched him in the face, knocked him across the room, and then threw him into a wall as horrified relatives looked on. Big Ronnie then picks up a chair and throws it at his infant son. The chair hit the wall above the boy's head, narrowly missing him. Mike Jr. gave this testimony at Butch's murder trial. Louise left Big Ronnie in 1953 due to DV, and those who knew him said he was really grief-stricken, and he wrote a song. The song was about the love for his wife, and he told her his love was not only for her, but their children. He swore he was going to be good, and things would change. Louise loved him, and she loved the song, and she went back to him. Big Ronnie had a creative side. The song was recorded by Joel Williams. The name of the song was The Real Thing. This is on Joel Williams' album, One Is the Loneliest Number. Life back at the DeFeo apartment went on when Louise came back. The same way it had been. The beatings never stopped. In early 1965, Louise found out that she was pregnant with their 5th child, John Matthew. Big Ronnie's in-laws aided in purchasing 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York on Long Island. Big Ronnie said it was a new beginning, high hopes, giving Big Ronnie prestige and dignity. He even had a sign made hanging on the front lawn that read, High Hopes. The DeFeos sent their children to St. Martin of Tours Catholic School in Amityville. The beatings got worse. After beating Butch, he would buy him a car or give him cash to make up for it. Big Ronnie was getting more into religion and spoke often of the Antichrist coming. He once said he was communicating with God. Ronnie felt he could see into the future. Big Ronnie told friends he knew what side Jesus was stabbed on because he was at the crucifixion, and he spoke often of St. Joseph. Big Ronnie had manic depressive qualities about him. He would go from happy to depressed and then go into a rage. In the early 1970s, the situation in the house was getting worse and worse. The house gave Big Ronnie his prestige and his dignity and his opinion. But when he walked in the door, he was reminded he did not buy that house. He did not pay for the fuel or the lights or the furniture, that his father-in-law, Michael Briganti, paid for the house free and clear and paid all the bills. This took away from Big Ronnie's manlyhood and his respect for himself, not being the provider. He felt emasculated and in turn demasculated Butch. Also, Big Ronnie knew the gravy train could stop at any point. By 1974, Big Ronnie was becoming more delusional. On a vacation to St. Joseph in Canada, when leaving, he said to Louise, "St. Joseph came to me. I'm saved. Me and him are friends now. We have a connection." Big Ronnie strongly turned to religion, according to Geraldine. The priest that Ronnie was close to convinced Big Ronnie he had psychic abilities. At the same time, he was draining him of all of his money. Ronnie started predicting things, telling people a tidal wave was coming, a tsunami was coming. He said he could foresee things and to take cover, even eventually taking away Louise's driving abilities, saying she was going to get into a car accident. He said he had a vision, and it continued on and on and on. Also, in 1974, Big Ronnie was becoming unruly at work, writing on papers "F you" to Michael Briganti and slipping them under his door. Standing outside Michael's door singing dirty songs, knowing he could get away with it because of Louise. When Michael Briganti decided to close the dealership, Big Ronnie began embezzling money, calling it Operation Going South. He realized that Michael Briganti was catching on to him stealing the money and now wanted Michael Briganti dead, telling Butch he had to kill his grandfather. When Butch refused to kill Michael Briganti, his grandfather, Big Ronnie wanted Butch dead, telling Louise after the big fight on November 12th that Butch had to go. Big Ronnie was shot in the back 2 times the night of the murders.
That his father had stolen over $200,000 from his grandfather to Canada, one of the first ones being to take the kids to a Christmas village out there. Mr. DeFeo had also gone up there on another trip and looked for property and homes because he was planning to embezzle as much as he could, get as much as he could from his father-in-law, and move the whole family to Canada.
Louise Briganti DeFeo was born on November 3, 1931, and died on November 13, 1974, at the age of 43. She's buried at St. Charles Cemetery in Farmingdale, New York, and had 5 children with her husband, Ronald DeFeo Sr. Her parents are Michael and Angela Briganti. Louise wanted to pursue a modeling career. When she was younger, everyone said how beautiful she was and that she could be a model. She attended Catherine Macaulay all-girl private Catholic school, and she married Ronald DeFeo Sr. in 1951 after a brief courtship. They moved to an apartment in Brooklyn, New York on 37th Street. After getting married in 1951 against the Briganti's wishes, because Louise was pregnant, they lived on a tight income on Foster Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. Michael Briganti severed all ties with his daughter over the marriage. In 1951, Louise had her first son, Ronald DeFeo Jr., who became nicknamed Butch by his grandfather, Rocco DeFeo. It wasn't long after Butch was born, the Brigantis made amends with their daughter. Louise's father paid for the house in Amityville for Louise and Ronald DeFeo. Louise idolized her father, Michael Briganti. He could do no wrong. Ronald DeFeo brought Louise to Brooklyn to show her that her father had another family, to knock Michael Briganti off the pedestal she had her father on, but it didn't work. It didn't matter what her father did in her eyes. Trigger warning, discussion of DV. Sometime in 1953, fed up with Big Ronnie's abuse, she left him. Ronnie used to beat Louise really bad. She was said to be a very beautiful woman and a very vain woman. Big Ronnie had left some really bad marks on her and even threatened to kill her. Louise didn't tell her father everything, but she did leave Big Ronnie. In 1965, when Louise was pregnant with their 5th child, Michael Briganti, Louise's father, talked to her, saying that they were crammed into their Brooklyn apartment and needed something more appropriate, a home more suitable for the children. And one house appealed to Michael and his daughter on Long Island, New York. On the water was 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, New York. For $65,000, with the help from Michael Briganti, the DeFeos moved in June of 1965. The beatings of Louise continued. Butch would leave bruises on her, to the point she had to dress from head to toe. He choked her, he gave her black eyes, and even pushed her down the stairs. In the early 1970s, the beatings were getting worse. First Louise, then Butch, then Louise, and Butch, then Dawn, Butch and Louise, and so on. Louise was an eloquent lady. When the fights outside the house with Butch would get so bad, she actually lowered herself, according to Geraldine, screaming and cursing at Big Ronnie to make him stop, because the neighbors would come out and they would be looking at them. Louise at one time was a very devout Catholic. She usually wore a cross around her neck until she thought at one point she was pregnant again. She went to go and talk to her priest, and when the priest told her if she did anything to terminate the pregnancy, she would be excommunicated from the church. She went home, took off the cross, and started wearing a chain Big Ronnie had bought her with a heart pendant on it. It was her way of saying the Catholic Church was not going to rule her life, as per Geraldine. Louise had 3 affairs during the marriage. According to Butch, they were all at the same exact time. One was a lawyer, one was a hair salon owner, and the other was the artist. This is the artist that did the portraits, according to Butch. They all had money. Butch knew about all of his mother's affairs. People said Louise's way of escaping from everything that was going on in the house was taking pills and drinking alcohol. Louise was starting to get a feeling in 1974 that Big Ronnie was stealing from the dealership and her father. She started noticing things and was starting to think if she took the kids and left, she would be better off. She was planning this in the fall of 1974. Then, on Thanksgiving, she changed her mind. She said she was going to murder them, telling Geraldine to stay home with the kids, that she was going to poison them all. But Butch deserved to be with them because he was just as crazy as them all. On November 13th, Louise was shot, found face down in bed, covered with a blanket. Louise was shot twice by 2 different guns, as per the Suffolk County Police Department. The portraits that hung on the stairway in the house. Butch just turned 18 years old when the portraits were done by Kenneth Van Rensselaer. 5 years before the murders happened, they were done by one of Butch's mom's boyfriends when she was having the affairs. Butch said it cost thousands and thousands of dollars to have the portraits done. The portraits were of Big Ronnie and Butch together, Louise by herself, Michael Briganti Sr. by himself, then Mark and John Matthew together, and then Allison and Dawn together. The DeFeos had some issues with the matte finish on the portraits, so Kenneth had to go back and do some of the work on them. Big Ronnie had a feeling that Louise was having an affair with the artist, Kenneth, and was thinking of having her surveillanced. Big Ronnie would call the red phone to call and check up on Louise. It is said she was having an affair with him, but Butch says she was. Ronald DeFeo Jr., also known as Butch. His grandfather Rocco DeFeo gave him the nickname. He was born on September 26, 1951 in Brooklyn, New York, and at the age of 23 years old on November 13, 1974, he murdered his whole family. He died March 12, 2021 at the age of 69 in prison, Sullivan Correctional Facility, Fallsburg, New York. The official cause of death has not been released to the public. Butch was married 4 times and had 1 child with his first wife, Geraldine Gates. They were married from 1989 to 1993. They were married before he was convicted. They had 1 daughter. She was born on August 21, 1974 in New Jersey. His second wife was Barbara Pucco. They were married from 1994 to 1999. His third wife was Tracy. They were married from 2004 to divorce time unknown. And his fourth and last wife was Nissa Buckelhalter from 2012 to 2015. She's pictured above. They had no children with any of his other wives. Growing up, Butch had it hard. As the firstborn son, his father expected more from him. Big Ronnie was not afraid to discipline Butch in the cruelest ways, such as throwing him across the room. As a child, Butch was extremely overweight. In his late teen years, he had began using amphetamines. He was overweight until this time. His school life suffered because of his weight. Kids would often make fun of him, calling him names like the Blob and Pork Chop. Butch was 14 when they moved to Amityville, and he attended Amityville Memorial High School. After high school, Butch held down blue-collar jobs. They never lasted very long. He was usually let go for absenteeism. Butch was often in trouble with the law, but he didn't care. It's said that he wasn't an instigator, but he was a follower. He was known around town as a troublemaker of the worst kind and had a temper and a half, and never backed down from a fight. Butch was an admitted drug user, a very heavy drinker. Some considered Butch a junkie, and some said he was an occasional user. It depended on who you spoke to. He was a petty criminal. Butch's regular hangout was Henry's Bar. The belligerent Butch would come out when he drank. Most of Butch's acquaintances stated that people had trouble getting along with him until he was older. It said a lot of people liked Butch when he got older. Butch admitted he liked to get high, and he could afford it, and he did whatever he had to get dope. In 1972, he went to work for his grandfather, Michael Briganti, at the Buick dealership as an errand boy, which included paying off money for his grandfather, Michael Briganti. Butch's father supplied him with cars and cash, $500 a week, so he didn't need to work very hard. Butch admits he was crazy back then. He was always starting bar-room brawls. He said he would get the worst of it and then come back the next day to get more. He didn't care. The DeFeos were not a happy family. There was a lot of abuse going on caused by Big Ronnie. The DeFeo family were extremely dysfunctional. Butch caught many beatings. His mother did not intervene for the most part to stop it. He said, quote, "I was crazy. My whole life I was getting beatings from my father. so he didn't care about the county jail and its COs, end quote. His father would always tell him, "You're nothing, you're nobody, you got everything because of me, you can't make it without me." Butch stated he went to school with most of the COs anyway, so he didn't care if he got in trouble or got arrested. Butch also did some work for his uncle and aunt Vincent and Phyllis Procida. When he was in his teens as a delivery boy, they claim he stole money from them. Butch says he put the money in the wrong cash register. He said he quit that job. Ronald's senior sister is Phyllis Procida. Butch caught a beating from his father once because he almost dated his mother's half-sister. This is how Butch found out his grandfather had 2 wives and 2 families. There was a rumor that Butch had once put a gun to his father's head and almost killed his father prior to the November 13th murders, but the gun didn't go off. It said that he did this to protect his mother and sister. They also say that if it was true, Big Ronnie probably would have killed Butch. There wouldn't have been any second chances. Butch was much closer to his mother than he was to his father, and had a very good relationship with his siblings, especially Allison. Butch married Geraldine and moved out. It amazes me how many people didn't know that he was married. I didn't know. Anyway, Big Ronnie didn't like that Butch wasn't spending much time at home. In 1973, he threatened Butch, and a deal was made that he would have to spend part of the time in Amityville, and he could spend part of the time being a husband to Geraldine, threatening to take his money and car away, and maybe even more. Butch developed an interest with guns at this point. In August of 1974, Butch and Geraldine had a baby girl, Stephanie. Butch was planning to get a job with the post office and not to go to Canada with his family when his father planned to run. He wanted to take the exam for a mail carrier. He also wanted to be a better father and have a better way of life for his own family. In the fall of 1974, Michael Briganti was shutting down the dealership, and Big Ronnie had started embezzling money from him. Big Ronnie found out that Michael Briganti was onto him and told Butch that Michael Briganti needed to be eliminated and that he wanted Butch to shoot his grandfather. Butch told his father he was not going to kill his grandfather. Big Ronnie told Butch he had a choice to make. It was either his grandfather or he would kill Butch, and handed him a gun. Butch gave the gun to his grandfather, refusing to harm him. He loved his grandfather more than anything, Geraldine said. Big Ronnie was not happy about this. It wasn't long after that Butch's brake line was cut. He told Geraldine his father did it. Everyone at the dealership was laughing, he said. Butch went to his grandfather, and his grandfather told him, "You do what you gotta do." Butch supposedly asked 2 friends to help. They told Butch, "Let Big Mike handle it." But then they agreed to the plan, and it was supposed to take place in Brooklyn. The plan never happened. On November 11, 1974, Butch goes to the Amityville home. Butch and Big Ronnie get into a screaming match in the driveway when Butch pulled up. He didn't stay. On November 12, 1974, Big Ronnie went into a tirade, yelling and beating the whole family. This is when Dawn grabbed the knife. Louise called Butch in New Jersey for help. Butch went to Amityville. The fighting was still continuing, and it ends when Big Ronnie falls and Louise comes to his aid. November 13th makes history.
I never used a drug in my life. Marijuana was everywhere, Barry, he was the marijuana king. But I didn't like that. I went right to crystal meth. The guy came back from Steve Hicks's brother, Roddy Hicks. And this guy George we knew needed money. He was a speed freak. He had Nassau County locked down, but he needed more money to go to Canada to cop to bring the stuff back. I gave him $15,000, which was a lot of money in '71.
It was a lot of money.
Gave him $15,000. I had to drive the man, but I didn't care. It was because of the money. And about 5 of us went. We dropped him off. He's safe. This and that. I said, "I'll see you in a couple of days." So when I went back in a couple of days, I thought it was going to be a problem getting the money. Not only did I get the $15,000 back, he gave me 2 ounces of pure crystal meth. I never did no drugs. Let me tell you, it's that kind of drugs. When I snorted that, my nose, man, blood was pouring out. That's how powerful I was.
Wow.
Dawn DeFeo was born on July 29, 1956, and died on November 13, 1974. She's buried at St. Charles Cemetery in Farmingdale, New York. Dawn was 18 years old when she was murdered by Butch. She wanted out of the house. She wanted to go to Florida to be with her boyfriend. In 1973, maybe 1974, Dawn met Billy Davidge and was completely in love with him. He was her boyfriend, and she was thrilled that he loved her for who she was. Most people judged her because of her weight. Dawn thought her way out of the house was with Billy Davidge, as per Geraldine. In 1974, Billy tells Dawn that his dad has been transferred to Florida. Dawn became adamant about moving to Florida to be with Billy. Big Ronnie was not going to allow this to happen. Dawn was enrolled in the Catherine Gibbs Secretarial School in Brooklyn, New York. Big Ronnie insisted Dawn was going to stay and finish school. This caused intense arguments, DV and Big Ronnie threatening if she left, he would find her, telling her if she did not believe him, she could go ask Butch. Dawn set up a way to get the money to escape, which we'll get into a little bit later. Then Dawn went to Geraldine, knowing that she was a musician and good with lyrics and writing songs. "This is so cool. I'm gonna write a song about how they all dropped dead," said Dawn. Geraldine agrees to eventually help after being shot.
Music.
"This is so cool. I'm going to write this song about, how they all dropped dead." And I said, "What?" And she said, "How they all die." And I said, who all dies?" And she said, "How my whole fucking family dies."
Dawn also was using drugs. It was definitely marijuana, and I believe they said it was dust. Geraldine stated that Dawn became a completely different person, becoming a female version of her father. On November 11th, Dawn was planning to leave the house and drive to Florida with one of her best friends. On November 12th, the big fight happened at the DeFeo house, and that's when Dawn chased Big Ronnie around the house with a knife. On November 13th, Butch makes history by murdering his whole family. But here's the question: did Butch act alone? Dawn was found face down, shot in the back of the head. I want you to drop a comment down below if you believe what some have said, that Dawn was involved in the murders. Many people believe that Dawn was also involved, that Butch did not act alone. They believe that Butch killed his mother, father, and Dawn, but that Dawn is the one that is responsible for killing the children. What is your feeling? Make sure you write it in the comments. Allison DeFeo was born on August 16, 1961, and died on November 13, 1974, at the age of 13. She's buried at St. Charles Cemetery in Farmingdale, New York. To escape the ongoings at the house, Allison stayed in her room doing puzzles. Her nickname at one time was Happy. It said she was a very calm girl. She stopped having friends over, even making remarks that her friends had normal families. Allison was found face down, shot, with her arms stretched, shot in the face.
Used to stay upstairs in her bedroom. She looked through magazines and she did jigsaw puzzles. Allison's personality was very, very quiet, and at one time she had such a bubbly personality that her nickname was Happy.
Mark DeFeo was born on September 4, 1962, and died on November 13, 1974, at the age of 12. He's buried at the St. Charles Cemetery in Farmingdale, New York. Mark played football and was even on the 10-year travel team. Mark became immersed in football to escape the ongoings at the DeFeo house. He was a star player, according to friends. Mark had a broken ankle at the time. He shared a room with John Matthew. Mark was found lying in his bed, face down, shot in the back. John Matthew DeFeo was born on October 24, 1965, and died on November 13, 1974, at the age of 9. He's buried at St. Charles Cemetery in Farmingdale, New York. Geraldine says John Matthew's way of dealing with all that went on in the DeFeo house was constantly running around through the house and outside. John Matthew was found lying in his bed, face down, shot in the back. Detectives said it looked like the shooter stood in between the beds, one on each side of the room, and shot from there. Geraldine Gates Raimondo DeFeo was Butch's ex-wife. Before marrying Butch, she was married previously and had 2 daughters. They lived in New Jersey. Her occupation was a musician. Geraldine's family in New York was also connected to the mafia, to the Genovese family. In 1969 to 1970, around the end of 69 to the beginning of 70, Geraldine met Butch DeFeo. He was 17 at the time. They met in New York, Greenwich Village, at a bar. Geraldine said Butch was very loud, rude, obnoxious. She was singing that night. After the set, he approached her. She said he was an extreme bragger. One of the first things he said to her was, "I live in a mansion upstate in New York." He introduced himself as Butch Black, which was a lie. Geraldine said he waved a lot of money around that night. This didn't impress Geraldine. She told Butch she came from money herself. She told him basically that he disgusted her. A couple of nights later, Geraldine finished a set and she went to sit down and have a drink. She sat on some roses, which did not please her. She found out that Butch had put them there on the chair. Geraldine said the thing about Butch that made her go out with him was the laughter in his eyes. When he laughed, she said, his green eyes just lit up. She said she thought to herself, "Oh my God, He has a lousy personality, but there's just something there. Geraldine said Butch was very gracious. He went to the best places and spent his money freely. She said he was a gentleman. He opened the doors. He pulled out her chair. She said he was a very gallant escort, proper manners, and always dressed really great. Butch had invited Geraldine over to meet his parents. She said he had bragged about his parents' home and having a pool in the backyard. Geraldine's first impression of the house was she couldn't believe it was black and white. Geraldine met Big Ronnie, Louise, his sisters and brothers, and a few of Butch's friends. It was a summer party, and they were supposed to go in the pool. Geraldine said Louise was an extremely beautiful woman, and they seemed fairly normal, the family. Big Ronnie was pleasant. The kids were great, she said. She said she met Bobby Kelsky, who Geraldine said was a fantastic person, very quiet. She said she felt like Bobby studied you. She also met Augie DeGeneiro, who she said was quite a character. She said Augie had the mafia look about him. She said he was very close with Joey Gallo and was trying to mimic being a made man. Geraldine said they all went in the pool. We were having a good time, and then all of a sudden, Big Ronnie threw a cherry bomb in the pool. She said Butch looked up in shock. She ran out of the pool and down into the driveway, and she wanted to go home. Later in the day, after the pool party ended, Big Ronnie was floating on a raft in the pool, and Butch, knowing Big Ronnie might have just ruined it for him and Geraldine that day, threw a cherry bomb under Big Ronnie in the pool out of revenge. The raft exploded. Big Ronnie didn't find this so funny. He chased Butch into the front yard and beat him in front of all of the neighbors. Geraldine said that day she was trying to figure out why Butch's mom was dressed from head to toe on such a warm day. She later found out she was covered in bruises, including choke marks around her neck. Geraldine said she was terrified that Butch would be like that. She left her first husband because of DV and didn't want to go through that again. Geraldine said, quote, "I can truly admit he was not his father," end quote. Geraldine said by the time she realized that the family was so dysfunctional, it was a bit too late because she was very much in love with Butch. By 1974, Butch and Geraldine were married and moved out. But Butch's moving out wasn't working out so well. Geraldine said throughout their relationship and marriage, Big Ronnie felt Butch wasn't spending enough time at home, making Butch only allowed to be a part-time husband. In 1974, Geraldine and Butch found out that they were pregnant. Big Ronnie was very upset about it. Their daughter Stephanie was born August of 1974. After the murders, the mafia connections between Geraldine's family, Michael Briganti, and the DeFeo family convened a meeting and discussed how to erase Geraldine from the record, including her driver's license, marriage license. She didn't have a birth certificate since she was illegally adopted. All the documents disappeared on Geraldine DeFeo to protect her. George Lutz was getting ready to make another documentary, and during the time, Rick Osuna, who was one of the investigators, met up with George Lutz. George approached Rick about helping him with an Amityville Horror picture book. One phone call started Rick changing his views the summer of 2000. The call was from Geraldine Gates DeFeo, Butch's first wife. She tells Rick the house isn't haunted and never was, that it was a scheme between Mr. Weber, Butch's lawyer, Butch himself, and George Lutz, telling Rick his website was the biggest piece of crap she had ever seen. asking what he was doing with George Lutz. Geraldine then went on to tell Rick she was married to Butch at the time of the murders and before the murders. No one knew Butch was married. Geraldine stated she didn't want fame or money. All she wanted was for Rick to set the record straight. Michael Briganti Sr., Louise's father, died at the age of 51, went to sleep and never woke up. Michael Briganti actually had two families. He had two wives and he had another daughter. As a young man, he worked in the New York garment industry and grew up with Carlo Gambino. His occupation was at Carl Buick dealership. It was called Briganti Carl Buick dealership, and it became a franchise in 1956 at 800 Coney Island Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. It was once known as Kings County Buick. He was very successful as a car salesman. First, it was Briganti Bernard. The dealership was also known as County Buick Incorporated, Briganti Carl Buick. Bernard is a judge. When he left the dealership, he put his son-in-law in there, Herbie Carl. John Ventiera, another judge, was also a partner at one time. They wanted Ventiera out of the dealership, so he lost the business on purpose. Briganti bankrupted the dealership on purpose to put it out of business, and this was when Big Ronnie started stealing money from him. Michael Briganti wanted a bright future for his daughter. Louise married Ronnie DeFeo because she was pregnant. Michael and her mother did not approve of the relationship and cut off all ties with Louise after the marriage. Michael purchased the house in Amityville for his daughter and the family in 1965, saying they needed more space for the children. Michael Briganti was very proud of his grandchildren, and he loved them, visiting them every week and taking them to buy shoes every week, clothes, jewelry, etc., whatever they needed, or wanted for that fact. Michael Briganti had been described as a man's man by people who knew him, gentle, emotional, extremely kind-hearted. His daughter was the love of his life, buying her anything she could ever want. All Louise had to do was say, "Dad, can you?" and he was there. Michael Briganti also knew he had control over Big Ronnie by purchasing the home, providing for Louise and the kids, paying Big Ronnie's salary. He had a Big Ronnie by the horns. Michael Briganti is said to have strong ties to the mafia. Growing up, he was very good friends with Carlo Gambino. A lot of mafia dealings were ran out of the Buick dealership. It's unknown if Michael Briganti knew of the DV going on in the DeFeo house. Some say he didn't, others said he did and put his head in the sand. The connections of Pete DeFeo, Ronnie's uncle, a top in the Genovese crime family, is said to have had something to do with this. In the fall of 1974, Michael Briganti started to realize Big Ronnie was stealing. Carlo Gambino asked to speak with Michael about this, and his son-in-law. This didn't sit well with Michael. Butch also worked for his grandfather at the dealership as an errand boy, but they weren't your typical errands. Butch's errands were taking money from Michael Briganti to pay off the police and judges. Michael Briganti also had a car ring where they would steal cars for parts. They supplied pistol permits, drugs, and Michael Briganti had his own body shop. When Butch was arrested for the murders, there was actually a hit put on Butch. Michael Burgandy had 2 sets of books, and Big Ronnie was the one that had them. Big Ronnie had them at the house because he was trying to blackmail Michael Burgandy. He didn't know that Butch had gotten rid of them, and the mafia put a hit on Butch. Peter DeFeo, Big Ronnie's uncle and Butch's great-uncle. Peter DeFeo was a Copa regime in the Genovese crime family, rival crime families, with Michael Burgandy being part of the Gambino family. He was known through the mafia as Phil Aquilina and was at one point brought up on murder charges, but he was not convicted. After the book and the movie came out, Butch's aunt and uncle were upset by all the attention. This is the aunt and uncle that Butch at one point worked for. Butch told them, go talk to his lawyer Weber and the Lutzes, the junkies. Peter DeFeo sent the boys after Dr. Hans Holzer, a paranormal researcher. Butch said Holzer got a bad beating. They said he eventually took off and went to England, that Peter DeFeo's boys couldn't find him. He did eventually come back to New York. Hey guys, that's the end of part 1. Part 2 tomorrow, we're going to get into the murders and the murder plan, and we're going to get into how the movie came about. I want to give my husband a huge thank you for all of his help with this video. I couldn't have done it without you, baby. Thank you, and I love you. Guys, until part 2 of Amityville, remember, every day is a mystery.